Excellent. All right, everybody. Well, good morning. Happy Saturday. First Master Gardener of 2025. I'm really excited to have Lynn Kaufman again here to present the second half of the irrigation and design for a transitioning your irrigation to support efficient watering. Today, we are also joined with Melody Knox, our Master Gardener host, and we're going to get started right away. Really excited if you guys missed the last workshop from November. Lynn presented the first half of transitioning your landscape into a more water efficient landscape, and that is at the Master Gardener website with the Western Master Gardener webpage. If you missed it, you can still check it out there. It's recorded. Same as this one. This one will be recorded, so if you miss anything, you're welcome to rewatch it. I'm going to pass it over to Melody in case there's anything from Master Gardener that she'd like to plug in.
Well, all of those that know me, let me say, woohoo! Happy New Year, everybody. And thank you guys for joining us so early on a Saturday. I'm coming out here to listen to Lynn and listen to me harass everybody. First of all, some of you who are not Master Gardeners are probably saying, well, what is a Master Gardener? I'm going to talk really quick because I know you guys can listen really quick. But I'm a Master Gardener with UC Riverside. And a Master Gardener, we are trained volunteers and we offer science-based information and advice to educate the public. And this is free. Most of the time it's free. So don't panic when we say, come to one of our info tables, we're going to charge you $1 or something, because we're not. We work in the community. We work with the community gardens like Moreno Valley Demonstration Garden, Fairmont Park. We also have children's school gardens. So you may have some children or grandchildren that go to school, and they might have some of these gardens, and usually we're a part of those. Also, you can find us at different information tables. You often will see it saying Ask the Master Gardener. You might see us at Lowe's. You might see us at Home Depot. That's us as Master Gardeners. We're always out there in the community trying to help. We're also in Riverside County, Corona, Temecula, Vale and Promenade, Moreno Valley, Murrieta, downtown Riverside. And we also have Master Gardeners in the desert area. So look for us at the Palm Springs or La Quinta farmers markets as well. Also, we have workshops at the Riverside Corona Research Conservation District. We refer to as RCRCD. And usually they have a table there the first week of the month. So we're all over the place. There's a whole lot more I could tell you about it, but if I keep talking, Lynn's not going to be able to get to her wonderful presentation. And also, when it comes to the questions, please put your questions to the chat box, and I will make sure that she gets those. And again, if it's something that we need clarification on, I'll go ahead and pass it along to her immediately. I also will be placing in the chat box information regarding our helpline as Master Gardeners. And again, we give out research-based information to the public. So we want you to be able to get a hold of us whenever you need us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lynn. I'd introduce her, but she kind of gives a really nice introduction of herself as she goes through this. So I'm going to let her do a whole lot of talking and bragging on herself today. But she's also one of our Master Gardeners. Always comes with excellent information. So please listen closely and enjoy. And thank you again for coming. All right, Lynn. I'm handing it off to you.
Much, Melody and Jeff. I look forward to talking to people who like to hear about improving their gardening. I will hopefully address the concerns of the audience we have today. I do recognize we have some Master Gardeners in the audience. I hope we have some new public people. And if you are a little bit overwhelmed with the thought of irrigation, I'm hoping that I'll be able to give some general ideas so you know what you should be thinking about and know if it's something you can handle yourself or if you need to call in some professional help. So I want to start though, well, are we in a drought? And that seems pretty self-evident based on what's been happening in LA this last week. It is because of the extremely dry conditions that we are worried about water. And I'm sure you also heard that they have difficulty getting water from the water systems as well. There were many reasons that took place, a lot of it beyond the control of systems that were not designed for firestorms across hundreds of thousands of acres. That is not something you need to be unduly concerned about. But I do want to know that you know that we have not received any rainfall that's really measurable in 8 months. That has put us into a very long and dry period. And so the blessing of the rains we had the last 2 years is pretty well, no pun intended, dried up. So really a better question that you have is, are we in a drought? Because we are, is where does your water come from? Because most of you are going to be on some form of city water through a water district, and they have a portfolio of water where they get it from multiple sources. And so what you are mostly concerned on is, as a homeowner, will be if I turn the tap on, will water come out? So this is really something that we need to all proactively work on. And that is where it ties into us as consumers or residents, where we can do our part to conserve water. So a better idea of thinking about it, whether than we're in a drought or not, is there enough annual rainfall and snowfall in the areas that collect the water and move it down into your water district, and therefore have availability for you? So that's really a better idea of what you want to keep your eyes on when you're looking at what is the water supply, actually. So by working together between you and your water district, you're going to have water management practices that are going to be able to make our water much more reliable and sustainable over the short and the long term, both. And so you actually have more control than you think. And so I'm going to talk about that in regards to how you reevaluate your landscape and its water use. So again, my name is Lynn Kaufman. I am about a 5-year master gardener. Before that, I've also been that long or a little longer, a Quell certified water efficient landscaper, which is an EPA designation and certification that I went through training for and have to do continuing education in order to keep that up. So I try to stay abreast of all new developments regarding all things water. Before that, I was born and raised on a farm. I've been working with plants my entire life. I moved to California as a young adult, newly married, and that really upended what I thought about growing things, because I was raised in the Midwest, coming out here to the West. When I arrived, we were in the middle of a very long drought and had a water crisis, which is where my interest peaked then, and I began to research and learn about how to use water more effectively. So my interests are on irrigation, obviously. Also with ornamental design, I like beauty. I don't want things ever just to be turned into ugly. And we do that with climate appropriate plants, and that's serve both us for the way we like to live and our native wildlife around us. So the first thing that we need to kind of wrap our head around is, when we're trying to think about our irrigation for our landscapes, is, are we approaching it from the best way? We've all been kind of accustomed to, or trained, or used to, whatever words you want to put around it, looking at our yards like they're in that upper left corner there, where it's all turf grass, maybe a border of a few plants of some sort, a tree plopped here and there. That's pretty much the way it's been sold to get people to move to California since the early 1900s, when the Rose Parade started being advanced and then became televised and was shot across the whole country. But that is not really a sustainable way for us to use water. We are not in the same climate as the Midwest or the East Coast, and we need to kind of change the way we think about our landscape. The challenge that I'm finding, and I've been working with a number of homeowners over these last 5 years, and so this is not just academic to me. I've helped and consulted with a lot of different homeowners at their properties to find out a lot of the problems we'll be talking about. And when they first started a few, 5 or 6 years ago, whenever it was that they started the turf replacement program, people thought, I'm going to save water, meaning they're going to cut it off, and that will save water. Well, it does save water, but it created a whole lot of unintended consequences. Nonetheless, is that it's pretty ugly and dry and hot and just makes things worse. So cutting your water is not the right thing to do. The thing that you want to be doing is finding efficient and effective use of water by creating systems for irrigation that meet the needs of your climate appropriate, that's the key word, climate appropriate plants, so they thrive. So an example of a thriving yard, which looks very green and has shade and doesn't blow dirt all around, is in the bottom. You can have a lot of green in a water-wise garden and efficient landscape. And that's where we talk about the design a bit, as well as the technical aspects of actually the irrigation systems. So I want you to think about what your yard looked like now, and how and when do you want to change it, in what parts and how often. So we're going to kind of go through that in a level of easier to less easy and less expensive to more expensive. So the first thing that I want to recognize is that managing water is not a new idea. It's been happening for thousands of years. A couple thousand in Europe, in Egypt, about 3,000 they have in China. So this has been happening where water is limited, or they need to use it in order to grow food, and they have to transport it over long distances in order to have a thriving, not ecosystem, but economy and people. So we need to reevaluate the way that we've been doing things. And that middle section actually shows that engineering for building housing tracts was kind of the beginning of that change. And their thought at the time for that was they didn't want any water on your property. They wanted it all channeled to move out. And that is not how it should be done in a dry environment. Perhaps where they get lots and lots of rain, that would have some value. But here we need to capture every bit of moisture that we get so that it goes into the soil, as absorbed and stored in the soil, so that the climate appropriate, or California friendly, if you like that word better, plants can have deep tap roots and tap into that as it's drier at any given month. So you want to be looking at the idea around the right part of this slide, where that we have regraded the lots as much as we can to absorb the water and let it sink in. Now that does not mean you need to regrade your entire landscape. That's not where I'm going to go with this. But the idea is we want to keep the water and not have it leave our property. So we make the soil more absorbent, more viable, which supports the plants. And we can do that by just doing that for passively by having rainfall stay, but we can also do that more assertively by capturing rainwater that falls on our roof and goes into a gutter. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So again, think about your landscape. I took this picture, the only word I have, of different ways of going to a water efficient landscape. Most people have turf, like on the right side, and traditional borders, I will say. And that can be effective with changing the type of irrigation you're using. But you might want to consider also, if you look at the left and the front yard, they've reduced their turf, which also helps conserve water. And back to the right, they have removed all turf and put in all climate appropriate plants. So there's different ways of putting this piece of puzzle together. And it's a matter of what you want to change and evolve. I think it's actually more important to evolve your landscape rather than spend the very large capital expense to just throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we want to think about how can we move in the right direction and keep improving as we go along. So part of that is, what are irrigation systems? What can you choose amongst? And what is the best one to use for the type of vegetation that you have in your landscape? And it kind of comes down to three ways. One is the traditional, what people think is traditional overhead spray irrigation, where you have buried PVC pipe and spray heads that come up in a pattern that makes sense for what you're growing. And then you turn it on and it sprays water all over the place. That's one form. Nothing wrong with that form, but it's not the only form and not necessarily the best one for what you're growing. In the middle there, we have different forms, and we have two different ways of looking at drip irrigation, which I will go into later. And that's allowing targeted water going basically at the roots, or soaking the ground, so there is no evaporation flying up into the air and disappearing when you're putting water out. And you can control the depth and area of the water specifically to the plants, and it doesn't get into non-plant areas like the side of your fences and the walls and down the driveway. So it's much more efficient because it's so targeted. And then I don't want us to forget about, because many people do forget about, there is a time and place for hand watering. And that can also be very controlled. It can also be very efficient. But there's some things I want to talk about that will make it so, because I see a lot of mistakes happening with the way people are applying their water through all three of these systems that is wasteful. So here's what you want to think about. You're always trying to figure out how do the plants and the water that make those plants thrive work together. So it is not a one or the other, or one is better than the other. They work in tandem with each other, and you have to make sure they're both working at their efficiencies in order to capture the most efficiencies. So we're trying to find that perfect sweet spot, if you will, between having the right plant in the right place. I will be explaining that in the next slide or two. But that really means, do you have the right plant? Is it water wise to start with? And is it in a place where that plant is happy and thrives? Then we figure out what's the irrigation method that will go best to delivering water to those plants. And then how can we affect and adjust that to make everybody happy? And that has to do with how you schedule, when you water, and we'll talk about that. So that's where we're trying to go with this. So you can see that it's not just a one thing, it's actually the integration of these three things together that make your watering efficient. So what plants do you have? So the first question is, do you know? Because many people don't know. I can start off by saying that if you have turf, you know, it's grass. And that system actually is best with overhead spray, because every plant in there is an individual plant, and they're all the same. So that makes it easy from figuring out what kind of irrigation you need for it. But if we're trying to move away from turf, which my presentation that I did in November is all about, how can you take advantage of the turf replacement program to help offset the cost of that for you? That goes into how you do that. If you're removing your turf or reducing your turf, what are you going to replace it with? And does your existing irrigation work best for those changes? If you don't know what plants you have, then it is best to go find some help with that. You can do that either by going to any of these plant identifier apps, which I'd say are okay. You might want to go to a local nursery that is a nursery, not a big box nursery, because they're very knowledgeable in independent nurseries and can tell you what the plants are. And then in addition to that, if you bring or take pictures of samples of the plants and go ask a master gardener, we're happy to identify them. Most of us can identify at least common things, and most of us can do a lot of less common things. So those are all places you can go to help you determine what your plants are. That's going to be important because we need to know what those plants like to live in, which brings us to, where do they live? And all plants, like everything, have a preferred temperature that they like to live in. Do they like shade? Do they like sun? Do they like clay soil, sandy soil? What's the environment they live in? And if all of your plants are very happy and look terrific, they like their environment. If you're finding plants that are struggling, that don't look good, that you have to replace a lot, they don't like something in your environment. And that, frankly, would be the first place that I'd think about switching plants out. Take out plants that are not doing well. And if you know it's an environmental issue, then put in a new plant that will like that condition. Because you're trying to match the plants and the conditions, and that includes matching the water to those plants. So if you have a deep shade area, don't plant a full sun plant. They're not going to be happy. So be aware of where things sit, if you will, and if they're doing well. That's going to give you some clues to start for how you want to adjust your irrigation. I'll make the point that if you have clay soil versus sandy soil, that will change the amount of water the plants want and how often they want it. So it is important to at least have a general idea of what your soil conditions are. And then this is important. Most people don't really think about what kind of water do my plants need. Every plant has a preferred amount of water necessary for it to thrive. And we've been lucky enough to have a database that will tell you that. And to make it simple, we're going to call it high water use plants, which are always grass turf. That is the highest water use plant on the planet. Everything is judged against that. So if you do not have turf, you automatically have at least moderate use of water plants, and you may have low and very low water use plants. So the pictures I have here illustrate turf and roses, by the way, to look really good are high water use. Tropical plants are high water use, and all food production is high water use plants. On the moderate side, you're going to find roses that can survive. Some do better than others with more moderate water. If they're a very established rose bush, you might be able to reduce water and they still live. They may not be show quality, but they'll still be a decent landscape plant. On the low water use, you're going to find things that are typically considered Mediterranean region plants. I went into that more in my other presentation, but anything that grew and evolved in California, the Mediterranean region of the world, Australia, the southern tip of Africa, and kind of the western area of Chile in South America, any plants that grow there natively are considered low climate appropriate plants. And based on the fact that it comes from 5 different regions of the world, we actually have a huge plant availability to us with all sorts of things that can be used to make your landscape. And then the very low plants are what are usually considered as desert plants. Those can also have very beautiful landscapes, but they're a little bit harder to pull off. You need to know a little more specific about it in order to get, one of these breathtaking desert landscapes. But they can still be quite lovely. And these websites that I have listed on this are not only the go-to, but the definitive answer on what kind of water your plants use. So use that to help you in your research if you need that. And this is our first thing where we start to kind of blend the idea of plants with watering. And this is a key idea. That's why I have the light bulb there in the upper left corner. We want to group plants that like the same conditions and the same water amount together. Don't mix them. That is the first problem that I see when I walk into someone's landscape. If they are watering this is an extreme example, but a rose next to a cactus, somebody is going to be unhappy or die. You're either overwatering for the cactus or you're underwatering to keep your cactus happy and choking your rose to death. So those two plants do not play nice together on the same watering system. So make sure that you're putting like with like plants. This picture is showing all low and very low plants. So they may have divided that out a little bit with different valves to make that look beautiful. But as you can see, even with low and very low plants, it can be quite verdant and beautiful to look at. So the key tip is edit out plants that don't like the environment, add plants in that do. So now we are going to assume that you have all the plants grouped properly, and we're now ready to think about how are we going to work with our water systems. And there's a fancy term for that called hydrozone, which means water zone. Makes that pretty straightforward. That you want all the plants that have the same light conditions on the same single valve. When you turn the water on, it's just that section that is being watered. And we're going to be able to refine that watering to meet the plant's needs. Not overdo it, not underdo it, make it just right, like Goldilocks. And this is the other thing that I see wrong with a lot of homeowners. that they don't know what their zones are. They don't know where their plants are lined up for that, and they don't adjust the zones for those special circumstances that those plants require. So I want you to take a look when you walk around your yard. Where does the water go on when zone one comes up, zone two, whatever amount of zones that you have? And we're trying to start to balance our landscape so that we have the least amount of high water use plants, a little more of the moderate, and a bigger base of low to very low square footage in plants. So this is where just kind of tweaking your plants that you have can begin to move this in the right direction. So that is a good way to begin the setup in order to become more water conservation in your irrigation. So this is the next quick and easy way of thinking about your irrigation system. Just like you have phones that become obsolete in 3 to 5 years, your irrigation system actually does as well. They do not last forever. So we want to think about if you're reaching the obsolescence point of your irrigation system, this is an especially good time to think about replacing those components or that system to meet what you have or what you're moving your plantscape into. And as a rule of thumb, again, if I was walking on your property, I would be asking this, or I would be observing it once we turned on the watering. If you have very low efficiency, you're losing a lot of water if you have overhead standard sprinkler nozzles. If you're not maintaining, if I see broken pipes or valves or anything around, and if you're not doing the proper scheduling. So I would be checking those 3 things. I could probably do that in about 5 minutes of looking at the system and tell you you're already off by a lot. And just fixing those things would immediately give you a return on your water investment. It's going to be medium, excuse me, if you have, generally speaking, been taking care of your system. You don't have anything overtly broken or shooting off in the wrong direction, but you still have a very old system. You have a gardener that you've delegated the work to, and when he sees something that's not working properly, he goes to his truck and puts something, goes, this will work, and he puts it on. And that includes the nozzle, spray head nozzles. They will not be matched, and that's going to be important, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Where you're getting the maximum efficiency, and it, by the way, it will never reach 100%. This is talking about a system with living things, and nothing is ever perfect. But the best you can do is if you've upgraded and matched all of your sprinkler heads, and if you're using overhead spray, they've been moved to the rotary nozzles or micro irrigation, which is a drip form of irrigation. You're using a smart controller, which I'll explain a little bit more in depth, and you're doing the proper scheduling. If you're doing all of those things, you are getting as efficient as you can get your system. So this is something I ask a lot of people, and they all say, I don't know. When did you last look at your system? Turn it on, walk around the yard, and see if it's working well and it's positioned properly. This is something that's just regular maintenance. At minimum, you should do it twice a year. I did it every month just to make sure, especially with drip, that I could catch something and not lose plants before it became that way. Now you can do this and test this, and you can look up how to do a water audit with water distribution, which I'll talk about why that's important when and where. But if you don't want to do it, you can get it done free with most water districts. I believe Western has this as a service to their customers. You can call them up or go online and request a free water audit, and they will come out and they will walk your yard, and then will tell you what you need to upgrade, and they will give you information about how you can get rebates on the parts that you need in order to do that. This is pretty sample. It may change. They do all change all of the time. So I don't always look at, and I certainly can't look up at all the different water districts, but there's a pretty hefty rebate if you upgrade to a weather-based irrigation controller, also called a smart controller, from a manual one. And they give you a nice rebate on rotating sprinkler nozzles. That's an upgrade should be doing for any overhead spray. They also help you in if you want to capture water and use the water you've captured and held in storage with either a rain barrel or a cistern if you have a large enough property that you can put in a cistern. Check all of these out. It's money that's available to you. So before you do a lot of changing of parts, see if you are eligible for any rebates. And you can talk to your local water agency to find out any specifics, and they'll just hand you a list if you have them come out and do the water audit for you. So when I'm walking around and looking at systems, and I do this in my neighborhood every time I take a walk, I'm seeing problems in the irrigation system. So in this lower left-hand corner, you'll notice there's water running off the property. Well, that could be for a couple of reasons. It could be either they have the incorrect scheduling, they're running the water too long and it can't be absorbed into the soil, so it runs off, or that could be a sign of a broken sprinkler. I wouldn't know until I actually was there. I can't tell by a picture, but it could be one of those two problems. The upper right corner, it's pretty obvious it's a broken sprinkler head. So the head's gone and it's just shooting water up. Behind it, you see those sprinklers that are not working well. You see, they look a little misty. And that is probably one of two problems. That is either the heads are buried too deep in the grass, which I see a lot of. So they either need to increase the size of the risers, the height of the risers, and or dig around them so it doesn't hit it as soon as it comes out of the sprinkler head. Or it could also mean the pressure in the water is too high, which can also cause misting. The lower one shows that same misting. Again, that could be a clog in the sprinkler head itself, besides the water pressure. But they're also aimed straight at the fence. Why are you watering a wooden fence? So that's just simply turning the head back into the yard. So some of the things are easy to fix. They take, minutes, and some of them are harder, but this is all showing examples of a system that needs repair. Now, if you're in a drip system, you also might need some repair. The obvious is when you can see water shooting, that means, something broke. I will say that drip systems require more maintenance. They have a shorter shelf life. They are very negatively impacted by sunlight on them. So they will fail much faster and if they are buried either in the ground or buried under mulch. So you want to be aware that you really need to walk your drip systems more frequently, because if it's not obvious, the next obvious thing is the left-hand side, which is a dead plant, and it can happen very fast. So if you see a dead plant, the first thing to think about is not that the plant failed, but that my irrigation did. So you may have to dig around a little bit to expose that, but that's what you're going to be looking for when you're thinking about drip systems, about where they need maintenance. And this is a spot that I often see people forget to think about. And I can tell you, my daughter, I'm the consultant for my daughter's property, and she doesn't do anything but worry about the plants, and her husband is supposed to be the water controller guy. So the fact that it's a mother-in-law against a son-in-law, we have some issues on giving advice on that. However, so I call in a professional when I know that he's not going to hear what I have to say. And this was an example of that. I noticed there was moisture around the valve head, that like on the left-hand side here. I didn't see it actually leaking, but there was unusual moisture there. And then when I did call in my assistant, not my assistant, but I actually called it an irrigation specialist that I've worked with before. And he said, oh yeah, the gaskets on the inside there were shot. And they had a very old system because their house was built in the 1950s. And many of you may have those very old valves. They no longer are efficient use of things. I'd replace them. And in her case, it was cheaper to replace the valve as to try to repair it. But it was not noticed by them in the ground. It was noticed by them by their water bill. It doubled. There was that much leak coming out of that it doubled their water bill that month. And so you can also check your water meter to see if there's a leak there that you don't know about. If you see that little tiny dial kind of on the lower right moving, you got a leak somewhere. And it may not be outdoors, but it's leaking somewhere. And I would call the water department and they'd help investigate where that's coming from. I am not super mechanically inclined. I would call a professional to replace any of these parts that you see here. Because sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not, and I don't like dealing with electricity. But these parts can all fail, and they can be the actual cause of some of your irrigation problems as well. Another thing that I see is people are usually overwatering because they see spots of dead grass or areas of dead grass in their lawns. And that could be pest problems, but it could also be watering problems. In this case, it is a water distribution problem. What that fancy word means is that it's not being evenly distributed, the amount of water that you're putting out evenly over the entire area. And that causes failure in spots. Either it's growing too much in one area or it's dying in another. And that is usually a design problem, actually. Usually more so than a failure of a sprinkler head. So you must, in order to do it efficiently, you have to have what they call head-to-head coverage of the spray head. And in that little blue diagram to the left there, you can see water coming out of, let's say, the right sprinkler head actually touches the next sprinkler head. I learned this the hard way when I first moved to California and didn't know what I was talking about. I thought they were over designing it. They were not. The reason is because it's a lot of water comes out initially at the base of the head, and it kind of dissipates as it goes out. So in order to kind of compensate for that, that's why the head-to-head sprinklers have to have some overlap, so you're getting even distribution. If that's what's happening, you need to have more heads added, more lines and heads added into your lawn in order to make that work. And then you can have efficient water coverage after that. Now, again, I've gone to that bright light idea in the upper left corner. This is if everything else is working, you've got the right design in your sprinkler system, you have the right system, and everything is in top working order as far as the piping is concerned. The next biggest thing you can do to get a huge amount of water efficiency is change out your standard spray heads. The way the standard spray heads look is when you turn them on, they just kind of spray water all over the place. Those waste a lot of water because they have, one, a very high output of water. As you can see on the slide here, they put out 1.5 to 2 inches of water an hour. That's very fast. And that's why you usually break up your scheduling, because your soil cannot take in water that fast a rate output. The other thing is that because it's shooting it up into the air, a lot is evaporating and never even reaches the ground. So you're just kind of throwing water and money away by using them. So if you switch all of your sprinkler heads to the rotary nozzle, that's the new one, and it works differently than the standard. It has bigger droplets of water that kind of rotate around. And that way they're heavier and they drop into the ground rather than evaporate up into the air. And so they have that problem solved. In addition, they have a slower output, which is about 1/2 inch an hour, which allows the soil to absorb the water. I will caution you, not only now, but later, that is important because that will change your scheduling. But know that it's a much more efficient head to start with. You want to buy all of the heads from the same manufacturer with the same part number, because every manufacturer and every part within that manufacturer has a different output, and that makes it hard to figure your scheduling. So if you have a gardener, buy extra parts, have them available, and when something's not working, say, I have the part, put it in. That way you're sure you're going to keep your system all in top working order. And then finally, we do still have rotor sprinkler heads. Those are the big ones where they, go over long distances and kind of make a sound as they move. Those are no longer considered state of the art for slopes. Don't put them on a slope. The water distribution is terrible. You miss the entire top of the slope and everything moves to the bottom of the slope. So the standard now, best practice, is use drip laterally across a slope. But there are some areas of very large turf grass that's applicable, like in a golf course. It is usually not that good in a residential property, but I mean, if you have acreage, that would be fine. So that's not as good as going to the rotary nozzle. But as you can see, even the rotor sprinklers have improved their water output. So if you have old ones of those in the right place, switch those out as well. This will get you a huge return on your efficiency, just doing this. And there are, again, rebates to help you pay for the cost of this. And that rebate, by the way, has nothing to do with the turf replacement program. There's two separate programs. And then finally, if you're able to convert to a drip system where it makes sense for your plants. So I do want to talk a little bit about how a drip system works. You must have a backflow preventer. If you're, I put this on a, an outside, rather than an internal, valve. But the principle works the same, whether it's a valve like you see on the right side, or it's putting on a spigot that you have in your yard. They work the same. You need a backflow preventer so you don't put contaminated water back into your water supply system. And then it's critical that you have a pressure regulator. And the reason that's critical is, on average, a city's water is at 75 PSI. And on average, a drip system needs 30 PSI. That's half. If you don't reduce that pressure, you're going to blow out your system on a very consistent basis. Don't do that. Just make sure you have a pressure regulator. You also need a filter, because not only are you pushing reduced water through your line, you're also pushing it through very tiny holes at the end that clog easily. So the filter allows contaminants from the supply to be filtered out before they ever go down the lines. And you need to empty and clean that out at least twice a year to make sure you're keeping your system as open as possible. The pressure regulator filter on the right is actually a combo thing. You can get them as a combination, or they can be two separate things. That's a matter of cost, time, space, things, those considerations would go into that. Then you need an adapter to get tubing from, hard components. That's just a part. And then you have whatever kind of drip tubing you're going to be using. And I'll talk about that specifically in a minute, until it goes to the emitter, which is where the hole is, if you will, where water comes out. And then another thing that I really recommend people do is get an end cap on the line that you can open and close easily. And the reason you want to be able to open and close it easily is that you can open it and flush the entire system and close it back up on those twice annual maintenance schedules you're using. And it just makes your life a lot easier. They have things you can tie them off and things, but then you can't flush the system easily. So I really recommend you do that. And then I want to make a sense, if you're doing this yourself, putting together the parts is a little bit like putting Legos together if your valves are already there. But you need to know that there is a pressure loss the longer the lines get. And as, again, a general rule of thumb, if you're putting tubing on relatively flat ground, up to 200 feet of run on a valve is usually going to give you enough pressure that you don't have to worry about it. If you're using the 1/4 inch tubing, those are what people call spaghetti tubing, you can run them up to 20 feet. I've never gone that far, but I have run them 8-ish feet, because I sometimes run them up a fence and over to a hanging pot. And so that's 8 to 10 feet of run straight up, most of that, and it can handle that very easily. So that's when you're designing, especially going into containers and pots with that tubing, just know that you're fine running those even up to 10 feet, and sometimes almost straight up vertically. So that will help you in figuring out what kind of parts you need. Now I want to talk about, there's two types of drip systems. And I'm trying to make sure I didn't skip a slide. So I'm going to talk about the one that people are most familiar with, and that's the point source drip emitters. What that means is that you take some kind of device that punches into a line and water comes out of it. That's a point source drip emitter. There are a lot of different kinds of emitters. They have all kinds of different water outputs, but I really am a minimalist and like simplicity and keeping things as easy as possible. And I'm going to make the recommendation you do not use flag emitters. That's that top little one that you see, because they clog very, very easily. I would instead go to the button emitters, like you see in the bottom left there. They can go straight into that 1/2 inch tubing, which I also like because it doesn't get knocked and hit by animals or people walking across things as much as possible. Although you can put the 1/4 inch tubing in and extend it out. There's no problem with doing it. Just know that that gives another thing for a dog to chew off or a rabbit or something. And I would recommend you have all 1 gallon an hour emitters. Don't get fancy, just keep it all the same. You already have put all your like plants with like plants. They're all gonna like the same amount of water. You can adjust the scheduling then to meet what needs to happen. It's easier to have a bunch of spare 1 gallon emitters when you need to add them or if you need to replace them. The other thing that's also very good in a container situation is the adjustable emitters. And I used them quite successfully when I was using half barrels as containers for like an herb garden. Because they almost work like a mini spray, except they don't go up in the air, they stay low. And it covers the entire container rather than, more of a point. And when you're changing, vegetables and things out a lot, I found this to be very successful in those more small confined spaces. So either one of those work very efficiently. So you're fine doing that. Again, I would say get some tools. These sometimes come in kits and don't always have these tools. So I recommend, because it makes your life a lot easier. The first thing I would do is I would have that end cap, and I might put a shutoff valve before the end cap so I can just turn it when I want to turn it off, and then take the end cap off and open it and turn it back on. So just a thing to think about. It's also good if you have lines that you want to let other lines off of that valve that you want to be able to turn off and on at will. Then these are pretty critical. You need to have a line cutter because trying to cut that with scissors or a pruner would be a nightmare. It slips around too much. You want to have a hole punch because trying to get the right hole into that is also challenging. And then you want goof plugs, so when you go, oops, I don't want that there after all, you can just plug it up and go on. So those things, they're very inexpensive. I'd have them as part of your standard tool collection so that you can work on your drip irrigation much easier and with a lot less frustration. The other point I will make about that is that when you're trying to cut, if a line breaks and you're kind of cutting it out and putting a new line in, there are they call them couplers that kind of join those two ends together. There are 3 different types of those. I find the compression ones and so frustrating, I don't want to use them. They work if you get them on, but trying to press those 2 lines together, especially if there's not a lot of give, is an exercise in frustration. The barbed ones work a little better. You're putting it at each barb, but again, if you don't have much play in your line, that's frustrating. So even though they work, I tend to go with the kind that like lock together. They are considerably more expensive, but they're also considerably less frustrating to use. That is a personal choice, but I wanted to make you aware that there are different kinds of couplers. The other thing is, whenever possible, keep the same manufacturer and the same parts, because they are all just a hair off from each other, and that's another source of frustration. So know which company you're working with. I find going to a box store hit and miss, so I always go to a dedicated irrigation supply store. but you can get things at Lowe's or Home Depot. Just know that you really want to know what you're asking for and getting there, what you buy. And then the type of tubing that you're seeing more and more, certainly in commercial properties, is this inline tech emitter tubing. And what that means is that the holes have been pre-drilled for you. They come in 6, 12, 18, 24-inch spacing. They have engineered into them pressure regulation, output to be matched along the entire line. And some of the better ones have been treated so that it will kill roots trying to get into those holes. So this is has a longer lifespan, less need for repairs because everything is there. And it's better for more permanent landscapes. If you're this is not particularly terrific on a bed that you have to change a lot. If you're doing a flower bed and change out your flowers a lot, other than the way you properly put this in is you want to offset one line of holes goes this way, and the next line is between those holes. So what the goal is here is that you're wetting the entire surface of the bed, not at a single point or at a root, but over the entire bed. This does encourage healthier plants because they keep moving out into more moisture. So it is better for that. They have a higher upfront cost, but they have a longer lifespan. So if you're talking about, cost per usage, it's probably better in the long run. So these lines I find work great for that type of bed. And then, as I said, drip irrigation takes more maintenance. So you want to be sure to flush the system like you're taking off that end cap on the left-hand side picture. And on the right side, it just unscrews the filter up by the valve, and you rinse that out and clear it out and put it back on. Both of them, if you have, screwable parts, is a very quick job, and you only have to do that twice a year. So again, you have to do that. The lifespan on tubing, the 1/2-inch tubing, if it's in the sun, is probably 3 years. And if it's under mulch, it's probably twice that. The lifespan on PVC pipe is about 25 years. That's a long time. If you don't have to change out those pipes, don't. And then it's just the heads and the repair more where you see them pop up out of the ground. I want people to understand a little bit about what drip does, and this is how it looks in the soil. And the thing with drip that people get incorrect is that they tend to put them right at the base of the stem of the plant when they plant the plant and then think they're done. And that is not correct. The plant has most of the roots that take up water that are out what they call the drip line. So when you put in a brand new plant, having it at the edge of the root ball, which is what, 2 to 3 inches away from the stem, is right. But as the plant grows, that spot is no longer really giving water to your plant. You need to keep moving the emitters out away from the plant in order to have a healthy plant. So it is not a one and done, a little bit more like the overhead spray, or that problem's been resolved for you if you're using the inline drip system. Again, this is best when we're talking about permanent landscaping as opposed to beds that you change all of the time. And you'll notice in the different soil types that the water goes deeper and wider depending on what it is. So that will affect how you want to do spacing as well. So this is a very good gauge for you to look at to see, do I have my emitters properly placed? And remember, again, drip is in gallons per hour and spray is inches per minute. Big difference when you're figuring your scheduling. So I do want to make a note regarding drip. Not all plants like drip. It might work. And what happens if they don't like drip is they die faster. They usually have a much shortened lifespan. If they're not particularly happy with the drip system as it goes along, they usually die within 2 to 3 years or start to fail in 2 to 3 years. I mean, not necessarily be dead. So just know that you might be replacing your plants a little more frequently with the drip as well. So that might be a consideration for you about which type of drip to use and how to or whether to use drip at all, depending on what the plants are. And I want to make a special note about tree because I see this and I see cities doing this in particular. They want to conserve water, they turn off the spray, they might put drip in, but they've trained those trees over, could be decades, to take that shallow, frequent water. When they turn that off, they're basically giving a death sentence to the tree. It may take it a few years to die, but you have to retrain your trees to grow deeper roots and with the way you change it. And the way you do that is if you're putting drip, you put it in a spiral pattern so you can keep extending at the end and keeping that spiral going so you're not redoing your system all over. Ideally, if you can put a tree on its own valve so you can control that, that works great. And the idea is over time, meaning a couple of years, gradually adjusting the water on those trees, because replacing a tree takes time and sometimes decades of time. So if you have a tree you like, treat it with the respect it should get, to retrain it to allow it to thrive when you're trying to be water efficient. Trees are valuable and we don't want to cut those off to save water and lose them. They really have more value in the landscape than any of your other plants. And make a quick note about manual watering. There is a place where some people actually like it. What I see people doing wrong is they stand for 2 seconds and then 2 seconds and 2 seconds, and that is basically doing nothing. You have to make sure the water goes deep enough into the soil to be worth something. And you either need to get a meter at the end of your hose so you can see how much water is going out, or you need to take like a 5-gallon bucket and pour that slowly in the area and then check down how deep it goes. And then when you're watering, check to see if you're reaching that same depth. You'll learn what it is over time, but you want to make sure deep watering happens and not just you're standing throwing water all over the place, moving because you're impatient. So know that some plants really prefer that, like natives. They don't like a lot of water. They will die with too much water in the summer. And if you're trying to train a tree, I have a tree that was taken off of the overhead, and I use a soaker hose around it on a regular basis in order to help train it to go deeper into the root system or into the soil system. So again, don't forget, it can be great in extenuating circumstances. And we are actually in one, which I'll explain it when we get to the controllers. And that's where most people go, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. I have to think about the soil. I have to think about the slope. I have to think about the sun. What kind of plant do I have? Well, I don't even know where to start. Well, we have a way to help you with that. And that's using a smart controller. And there are rebates for that. And what this does in a brief moment is that it does all of the calculation and thinking for you and adjusts on a daily basis because it's weather based. And it talks to what they call a SIMA station. And depending on how the humidity in the air and how long it's been raining, it does a lot of that calculation for you. So it's like the difference between having a traditional timer on your lights to go off and on, and having a smart heater thermostat, which will learn and adapt to what you want as it goes along. The thing that I want to be sure you recognize if you're changing out your controller is you want to make sure it's waterproof if it's outside of your garage where it lives. And you want to make sure that it goes with whatever technology you want it to match to. If you have an Apple or an Android, if it's a Lexus, if it's, whatever names everybody's got, they are not all compatible with each other. So make sure your controller is compatible to the way you like that to be. And also you need to make sure you have enough valves on that controller for what valves you need in your landscape. I want to talk briefly about seasonal adjustment. This is what happens. We have in theory, a wet winter season and a dry summer season. And so the smart controller is designed for having the highest amount of water need, which is in July and August, and then adjusts for you down to when we have what I call a normal year. We have not had a normal year in the last 3. We had too much rain the last 2 years, and we do not have enough rain now. So you may still need to watch your plants and adjust the scheduling, because you can't just delegate it 100% to your smart controller, because it is not designed for these kinds of circumstances. So I used to turn off my irrigation for about 4 months a year, from like December to April. This year you need to water. So be aware of what's actually happening in real time, and not just rely 100% on your controller, but it can do a lot to assist you, especially if you're on vacation, so you don't want to be standing there. It takes care of that when you're gone. Ideally, we're trying to get an inch of water. As you can see from this, and this is important to see, if it's cool season turf, which is what most turf is, you need 1 to 2 inches of water a week. The reason there's a range is in the winter it's 1, and in the summer it's 2. So that's accounting for our swinging moisture in normally. Warm season turf, which would be like St. Augustine grass, needs half what regular bluegrass needs. So just changing the type of plant reduces your water nearly in half. From that also, if you go, the same is true for any high water, which would be food growing or turf, it's still the 1 to 2 inches. But if you go to a moderate plant, which is something from the Mediterranean climates, you're again half the water. And if you go to low or very low plants, which are not necessarily just desert cactus, you need even half again. So by changing the plantscape and then also changing the irrigation, you can, depending on if you do it all to the best degree, you can reduce your water about 75% going forward. And that's if there's no extenuating circumstances. So it makes a difference what plants and how the systems are set up to be used. Again, as I said, don't just forget it. You have to keep an eye on it, because your system is not a mind reader. It just does what it's told to program. So when we have unusually hot, dry, or unusually wet, you need to adjust it and help it as well. There's all these fancy tools to check the moisture. The 2 easiest is your finger, if you don't have to go down too deep, or this screwdriver. Believe it or not, if it goes into the ground easy, the water's deep. If you can't get that baby down there at all, it's dry as a bone. So that's just a fast and easy gauge if you don't need to know all the exact numbers for that. Write down what you're doing, because I can guarantee you won't remember. You can get these schedules all over the internet. They're easy to do. You might need to experiment until you find what your yard likes. So while you're experimenting, you need to know what you did so you know how to adjust. It's just common sense to do this. Keep it where you can easily see it, usually at the controller, so you can adjust from there. And then now that we've got all the right plants and all the right water going, and you want to keep the water in the soil, not have it leave. Mulch is critical for that. It needs to be a depth of about 3 inches. If it's organic, meaning it's this wood-based products, it needs to be replaced, because it deteriorates into the soil, which is a good thing, because it's actually improving the water absorption of the soil. But it does need to be replaced on, every couple of years at least. It's just effective for moisture control to use inorganic, which is basically a rock type mulch. That does not need to be replaced as frequently. It does need some. If you're using it, I recommend you put a landscape fabric under it so it doesn't sink into the soil, because I can tell you if you change your mind, you need a jackhammer to get it out. But it's very effective for moisture control. And so that's a matter of preference, look, things of that nature. Now, this is just the habits to make even top it off to be the most efficient you can be. I realize I'm a little past time. I've only got another couple minutes here. Just water your plants. Make sure your system is working. Walk and see it in action so you know that it is. Make sure your plants are grouped together to help that irrigation be most effective. Make sure you don't have any dying spots, though you need to change the distribution design of the system over turf or low growing ground covers. Make sure you've upgraded to all the latest spray heads in particular. And that will make sure your system and plants are in alignment with each other. In addition to that, be aware of how fast your soil drains, because that will tell how many times you need to run cycling in order to get that 1 inch of water. So if you need to run it 3 times a week for 10 minutes at a time, or whatever that cycle needs to happen, that will help you know what to do. Know what your plants are, so you know you're giving them the right amount of water. I see a lot of people that switched to drip. They kept the same schedule and their plants all died and said, I'm saving water and killing your plants. Because the drip takes out much longer. You run in an hour. You don't run it equal or less to what you had on your overhead spray. Make sure your plants really do need water. Sometimes they look yellow-ish and you think, oh, they need water, when actually they're getting overwatered. So check, just stick your finger in the soil and see which one you're dealing with. Water less often, but deeper. That's much more efficient and much healthier and makes your plants much more resilient to changes in temperature and wind and things of that nature. Only do overhead spray. This is important for overhead spray between 6 a.m. and 10. That way you do not have the water lost for evaporation and going up into the air. It's not as critical when you're doing drip, but it is for overhead spray. Be sure to adjust your watering system in the spring and in the fall and keep your mulch on. With that, this is how Melody talked about where to find us. These are, written down for you so you don't have to remember what we were told. We're happy to help you any way we can. Jeffrey's happy to help you any way he can with any of these questions. We're all working together to try to have a thriving, green, water efficient Southern California. And you can see us all sorts of places. And with that, I'd like to say thank you. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Yes, Lynn, I have a couple from Anna Jimenez. She wants to know, like, the tools that you were talking about dealing with the irrigation system. She says, are those tools in the standard stores like Home Depot and Lowe's?
They are.
And then another question.
But ideally, you want to make sure they're made from the same manufacturer as whatever your other component parts are, because those holes could vary that you're punching. But the tools are, you can get all of it at Home Depot or Lowe's. The point I'm really trying to make is make sure you always go to the same store, always get the same brand, and make sure it's the same brand part number. But they all have them.
Which is an excellent point, because it's easier for you to find it, to connect everything together instead of trying to take this other one out to match something else. Another question that Anna had, she said, is night watering not efficient? Just curious about the times.
The reason people told you not to water at night is it involves more overhead spray than drip. Because what happens is that leaves get wet overnight, and that can breed fungus and diseases to grow. So that's the primary reason. There's nothing magical about whether the water goes in, because it rains in dark, right? But it's just better to do it. I like it in the early morning hours, because most people are asleep at night, don't ever look at their watering. So if it's like at 7:30 in the morning or 8:30, most people walk out of their house to go to work. They'll see if the things are actually working. And it's before the winds have come up, so there's no evaporation going into the air. You can do drip any time of day that you want, but it is still better to do it early, because it helps gird the plants to be ready if we're having a very hot spike coming in the day. I hope that answered what she needed out of that.
Okay, and another question from Jean Weiss. She says, what coupler did you recommend? It wasn't bar or compression.
Yeah, and the actual name of that is escaping me at the moment. Let's see but they're like two parts, and they click together. Let's see if I can call it what they call it. I know it when I see them. I don't know if I wrote down what they call them. Hang on just a second.
And with that being said, you have some excellent comments in here. A lot of people, of course, we always love your presentations. What
Well, thank
they were
you.
saying is how thorough they are. And they're so glad they're going to be recorded so they can go back and listen to it again and get your wonderful information.
Thank you. I'm not fighting the name of what they actually call them, but they're pieces together that like snap together. You don't, you just like that, they're very, it's like the easy release type of coupling that you would put on a water spigot. If you don't want to have to keep threading your hose on all the time, you just quickly pull it in. It's that same concept. I'm sorry, I actually don't remember the name of what they call them. I just know what they look like and how they work.
One more question. Deb wants to know, is there anything that we can put on our drip lines to keep rabbits and squirrels from chewing a hole in them? A cat? No, I'm sorry.
But I'll tell you a story about that, because my daughter, again, was having a nightmare. She had dogs that were chewing everything up. And so the solution we had was kind of a hybrid of what the two systems I said was. So what we did is we buried PVC pipe along the entire length to replace the 1/2-inch tubing idea, right? And then underground, we used a special coupling to go from the 1/4-inch tubing into the PVC pipe. You have to have a special, you know, they don't go straight in. You have to get an adapter for that. And we buried the 1/4-inch tubing under the ground and then just brought it up right where we wanted the emitters to be around the plant. So you could only see the emitters. And that took care of the chewing problem with the dogs. And my guess, it would get rid of most of the chewing problem with animals, because what animals are, not dogs, dogs are just like to be destructive. The other animals are looking for water. And so they're biting at the water, which is why, by the way, if you're in a vineyard, why they put all of their drip irrigation up about a foot along and run it is to let the water drip down so the animals don't chew it. So you have to do different things depending on what your pest problem is.
One more question. I know they're coming in now, right? Cheryl Carnell wants to know, can you plant over the top of septic tanks? She says she's in an unincorporated Coronita only. Use a septic in our front yards.
Okay, so the short answer is that yes, sort of. You don't want a tree over a septic tank because it's going to have deep roots that will go into the septic tank. You can plant most bushes that grow, 4 feet and less, because their root system doesn't go down much farther as a rule than that 4 feet-ish depth. And a septic system is usually at what, 15 feet or something like that. So the answer is sort of. Depends on the plant.
Well, that looks like it for now. I mean, like I said, you have excellent comments in here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy. I hope it was helpful to everybody.
Yeah, they're saying it. Some people are going to replace their irrigation, and they thought they knew what they were doing until they listened to you and realize they didn't know what they were doing. So yeah, this has been very helpful. And I know we are over time, so Jeffrey, I'll give it back to you. Then you can give it back to me, and we'll get it done.
All righty. Well, Lynn, thank you so much again for another great presentation. I'm really happy that you were able to present this information. And as you see in the chat, everybody loved the information and learned a lot. My contact information, I'm going to put in the chat right now. If anybody has any questions about the turf transformation rebate, if you have questions about getting a weather-based irrigation controller, please give me a call or send me an email, and I'm more than happy to help you out. Again, if there's any questions, Master Gardener information is on the slide, and this presentation is being recorded and will be available on our website, the Western Water Master Gardener page. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Melody, do you have anything else that you wanted to plug in?
You always have something to plug in, Jeffrey. You know me. I feel like this is like one of those little shows. Just really quick, I just want to thank everybody for supporting us and coming out to get this wonderful information. We had a wonderful turnout today. Next month, we're going to be doing firescaping on February 8th. which is very, 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 very important. How can I not emphasize that, right?
Very timely.
Very timely. So hopefully that you guys will come and join us. And again, this is open to the public, so you don't have to be a master gardener to come and join this. So just tell your friends and your family and have everybody come in and listen. And hopefully that we hope that you got some excellent information and that you'll get some excellent information next month regarding the firescaping. Another master gardener tells me, remind you guys of the Home and Garden Show this weekend as well. Come on, you master gardeners, you guys have to look at the certain things coming through the emails. And also, like I said, and I'm going to get out of here, but I was telling the audience that if you want to get our newsletter, please, I had a link in there where you can sign up to get our newsletter, and it will tell you about all the different things that are also happening with the master gardeners and how we coordinate with Western Water and other important facilities. So sign up for that. And I'm signing off here. And again, thank you, Lynn. Thank you so much. And Jeffrey, I'm giving it back to you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend and stay safe out there. Take
All
care.
right.